Hello to all the rugby league diehards and welcome to another episode of Six to Go. My name is Tom Canfell and it's great to have your company. As we head into today's episode, you know how it works. We will cover 6 topics related to the game or even their own career. My guest this week is Michael Carayannis. Michael is a journalist for the Daily Telegraph and this week broke the story of Reece Walsh to the Brisbane Broncos. So I've got him on to break down how it all happened and the fallout to everyone involved. Plus we will discuss some State of Origin news as well. Hope you enjoy our chat. Here's Michael Carayannis. I'm joined by Michael Carayannis as the next guest on the 6 to Go podcast. Michael, how are you, mate?
Well, Tom, how are you?
Good, thanks. It's a pleasure to have you on. I've got 6 topics to cover with you today, and we'll kick things off with Reece Walsh. Reece came out a while ago and said he was committed to going to New Zealand. How did this come out now that he's off to the Broncos?
Yeah, there's been a bit of movement, a bit of innuendo in the background, for the last 6 or so months regarding Reece Walsh's long-term future at the Warriors, and he came out, as you mentioned, Tom, it was 6 weeks ago, he came out, 2 months ago, and he said, no, I'm committed, I'm staying with the Warriors in 2023, I'll travel to Auckland, but his personal circumstances changed. He split up with the mother of his young child, and about 6 weeks ago he confronted the Warriors and said, look, I don't think I can go to Auckland. I need to stay in Australia to be close to his young child, and that's probably how it's moved.
Why is it that he's only been allowed to negotiate with Brisbane? Because clearly the Dolphins would have wanted to have a crack at him.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of reasons there. What the Warriors are saying is so Reece made it clear that he only wanted to remain in Brisbane if he was to get out of the contract. So the Warriors said, well, we'll give you a conditional release, and part of that condition is that you can only negotiate with the Broncos. They didn't want a circus. They didn't want this to drag out in the public domain where Reece became part of a bidding war between the Titans and the Dolphins and the Cowboys and whoever else might have been in for his services. So they made it clear, and to that point as well, when they're negotiating a potential player swap, well, they can't do that with the Dolphins. They're not going to give up any of their players. They don't have a lot of players to choose from, where Brisbane, obviously an established club, lots of players that, if they go down that path of a potential player swap, well, that avenue's open to them.
And what players will be going back to New Zealand in the swap?
They're still going through that at the moment. I think Jesse Arthurs is potentially one. He's obviously with the Warriors at the moment, but he's been loaned out for 12 months to the Warriors. He's supposed to go back to Brisbane next year, so I think he's probably at the top of that list, and they might get some sort of financial compensation as well.
Do we know how much this deal is worth? Because I've seen various numbers reported, and a couple of them seem really low for a player of Reece Walsh's calibre.
I think it's probably around that $500,000 mark at the moment. Don't forget, he's only 19. He played 30-odd first-grade games, so I think it'll be an incremental deal around that to start off around that $500,000 mark, and then work its way up. But nothing's been formally done with the Broncos yet, so they're still in the midst of trying to work all that out.
Let's go through team by team and see how this affects each of the parties involved. We'll start with the Warriors. They bring in Chance to replace Walsh, but let's be serious. This is a massive blow to the Warriors, losing Reece Walsh. Where do you see their current status as a club at the moment?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think in the short term, I think Chance in the next 12 to 24 months is probably a perfect fit for where the Warriors are at. They lack leadership. They lack a steady hand off the field, and he does that. He's a really good influence around the playing group, and with that young roster, I think he'll help them a fair bit. He wants to be in New Zealand. He's a Kiwi. He's moving basically for the same reasons Reece has got out of his Warriors deal. He's got out of Canberra because his young kids are in New Zealand. They're in Auckland, so he wanted to get closer to them. But Reece Walsh has the potential to be a decade-long, not only first grader, but a representative player at the highest level. So it's definitely a blow. But Chance, I think we're probably, a lot of people are probably disrespecting, I guess, what he can bring to the side. I think in a bad situation for the Warriors. That was not their own doing. It's obviously Reece Walsh that wanted out. I think they've done the best that they can to try and get someone of Chance's calibre into the squad.
Just on Chance for the second, we'll come back to the Warriors shortly, but just on Chance, now that he's signed with the Warriors, no longer committed to the Raiders long term, if the Raiders slide over the next couple of weeks, could we see Chance move to a club in contention like Tavita Pangai did last year, go to Penrith? And I'll pick an example for you now. The Storm are missing a couple of key outside backs long term, Xavier Coates and Remus Smith as well. Chance can play on the outside backs. Could we see that move potentially over the next few weeks if the Raiders slide?
My head hasn't gone there, but it does. It could open up the door for that too. If the Raiders feel like they're out of contention in the next couple of weeks, and a club loses a fullback, well, it makes sense.
Lodge, Walsh, and you can even go back to Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. Why do the Warriors not only have a problem producing talent, but when they finally get some, they lose it pretty easily? Yeah,
well, I think we've got to just be careful in the way we judge the Warriors at the moment, because don't forget, Ewan Aiken, Matt Lodge, Reece Walsh, even Nathan Brown, the coach, all signed deals thinking that they'd be in New Zealand for 2 or 3 years at the very least. But these things, circumstances change quite significantly with COVID. And, in Ewan Aiken's case, he's got engaged now to someone that lives in Queensland. So to travel somewhere for just 12 months, probably didn't make sense for him, but if you went and he was going to stay there for 3 years, it does make sense. I can understand why some of these guys have wanted out of their deals, and it's a different world than the one that they agreed upon to sign with the Warriors. If you sign in normal times, if you sign with the Warriors and you didn't want to go to Auckland, well, you're an idiot, right? Well, you know what I mean? Like there's no point in arguing. Well, you just that's not a valid excuse, but the way that when these guys have signed, it was pre-COVID. It was when they had every intent of spending at least 24 months in New Zealand. That was the original plan, but things have changed. So I can understand why their circumstances have also changed.
The Warriors had a swing and miss at Christian Wolf. Now it's come out that they've hired Andrew Webster today. A bit of a left field one. What do you make of the hire?
Yeah, interesting. Andrew Webster's probably gone about his business pretty quietly in the background for the best part of 2 decades now. He's been in and around a lot of clubs. He started in the UK and then spent some time at Parramatta, had an extended stint at the West Tigers, and I think it was 2 or 3 stints at the West Tigers, and one where he was interim coach for a handful of games, or 2 or 3 games for in between the Jason Taylor, Ivan Cleary situation. He spent 2 years at the Warriors as Andrew McFadden's assistant, and has spent the last couple of years at Penrith and following Ivan. So he's a young guy, a young coach, but vastly experienced at the assistant level. And he's one of those guys where the Warriors, whatever reasoning or whatever this means, but they were looking for an emerging coach. That's what they wanted, and I guess that's what they found.
Out of all the coaching vacancies that have been over the past few weeks, where would you put the Warriors as far as an attractive option goes?
Because they're based in New Zealand, their roster's not the greatest, and they've spent so much time away, and they've got to try and re-engage with the community. They're probably, if you're looking at what the vacancies, so we're talking the Tigers, the Bulldogs, and the Warriors.
Yep.
They'd probably be the third choice, just because it all depends on where you live and your family circumstances and all that sort of stuff, right? For a Kiwi, it would be number one choice, wouldn't it? But for an Aussie, that's a Cameron Serrato or whoever, Shane Flanagan or whoever else you might think is available. Well, it's probably their third choice, or it's not a choice because those guys didn't put their hand up at all to land one of those gigs.
Let's move on to Brisbane. This is a massive win for Brisbane. First of all, do they see Walsh as a long-term fullback or 5'8"?
I think he's signed to be fullback. He's still obviously very young. He's still 19. I think he turns 20 later this month. So he's got time to transition into the halves, but I don't see that happening next year or the year after. They've signed him to be their fullback.
So what happens to Cobbo now? He's re-signed, but it's you'd imagine he'd want to play fullback at some point down the road, and surely he won't stay on the wing his whole career.
Yeah, well, I think that's going to be an interesting conversation with Cobbo and Herbie Farnworth as well. I think he had eyes on a potential fullback switch. So, it's too early work out how that's all going to play out, but I think it's definitely going to heat up.
Does this move bringing in Walsh affect the Payne-Haas situation? I can't imagine we don't hear more about Payne in the off-season and his contract dispute.
I don't see it. They're not correlated. Brisbane wouldn't have sacrificed Payne-Haas to sign Reece Walsh. I think, there may be other players that, get moved on. There definitely would be players that get moved on before Payne-Haas. Well, Payne-Haas' situation is totally independent of Reece Walsh's. How that plays out, I don't know. But yeah, they're not correlated at all.
Can you see Brisbane as close as next year being a premiership threat?
No, I wouldn't say so yet, but there's plenty of upside in that squad. And, I think they've definitely surprised me this year. And if they can, they should probably finish in the 8. If they can finish in the 8 and jag a finals win this year, you throw Reece Walsh into the mix, you throw some of those other youngsters with more than 12 months of experience under their belt now, then, they'd be pushing for the top 4 next year. There's no doubt about that. They're on a side. They're a side on the improve, and, hasn't been that case for the last 3 or 4 years at Brisbane.
Let's move on to the Dolphins' point of view in all of this. Do you agree that this expansion club roster recruitment is a disaster?
It's getting there. It's they just don't have. They've got a solid squad, but they don't have that superstar, and that's what they lack at the moment. If you had what they've already recruited with 2 superstars, I think you'd be sitting okay with it. But they don't have that, so that's a question that obviously needs to be asked of Peter O'Sullivan and Wayne Bennett, and they haven't panicked, which is good, and they haven't thrown silly money at guys across the board, so that they've remained patient. But they've got to be a little bit anxious that pre-season training for them resumes or starts in October, November, and who's going to play in the halves? Who's going to play at hooker? I know they signed Jerry Marshall-King, but who's going to be that star quality that they're going to be able to build that club around, and they just haven't been able to land one yet.
People say they have a good forward pack. Most of them are over 30, and in the fair dinkum department, a lot of them, their best days are behind them. Can you even see Cameron Munster wanting to join this club, or will it just be a point of the money is just so great it doesn't even matter?
I don't know. I'm not sure how what Cameron Munster's going to do. I think the forward pack's fine. I don't think it's like a forward pack that's lacking star quality too, because you've got some real hard nosed players there, but who's going to bend the line? Will they be able to get 20 plus games out of all these guys on the other side of 30? I don't know. In terms of Munster, I think there's definitely an attraction of returning to Queensland for him and leading the franchise, but it's a tough ask to go from what he's been used to at Melbourne to try and start up or be part of a second year, because it won't be next year. It'll be the second year franchise on the Dolphins.
If you could go back in time to when the Dolphins were first introduced, what would you change to allow them to be more competitive in the market? Because they've struck out every time when it comes to a marquee player signing, particularly spine players.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. Do they need more time? Do they need to sort of off seasons cracks at it? Was that part of it? Should they have been preparing for 2024 instead of 2023? Maybe that's it. That's probably the only way, unless you're going to hand them out some salary cap dispensations and they can spend X amount over the cap to get players there. But then you're also getting players there for the wrong reasons. Does that help in building culture and a sustainable business model going forward? I'm not sure.
Let's move on to the West Tigers. Luke Brooks fired some shots in a press conference yesterday, and I think good on him for what he said. Can you see him being there next year?
I can, definitely. Yeah, I definitely can. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation for the new coach. Tim Sheens is a huge fan of Luke Brooks, and if it wasn't for Tim Sheens, Luke Brooks would be running around in a Newcastle jersey this weekend. So, he basically stopped Luke Brooks from departing the club during the off-season to get that release and going to Newcastle. That was very close to being done. So I think you'll find, Tim Sheens is a huge fan. Whether the new coach is of the same opinion or not, I'm not sure. But they obviously have Adam Dewey, Jackson Hastings and Luke Brooks all off contract at the end of next season. Is
Tim Sheens a realistic possibility to coach this team again?
Yes. Yep. Believe it or not, yep. The guy that they sacked 10 years ago might be back, but that's what the Tigers do. They've done it with Robbie Farah. They've done it with Benji Marshall. They bring him back. So who knows? But yes, he's definitely a chance of coaching the West Tigers next year.
If he was to do that, you couldn't imagine it being a long-term thing. You'd have to think he'd have an assistant coach there who he'd be, preparing, ready to go, wouldn't you think?
Has to be. Yeah, that's the plan. That's the plan. There's no doubt about that. That if they do sign someone or if they do go with Tim Sheens, they have to sign someone underneath him that they feel like is going to be his successor in 3 years' time. I'd say you'd probably give Sheens, 24 months at the helm, wear a few bullets, get all those youngsters ready, and in an ideal world, have that coach ready to go in the third year.
It's just remarkable, isn't it? The coaching carousel of the Tigers started with the departure of Tim Sheens. Could end there. On the subject of coaches again, can we rip around to the other two? Oh, I suppose the Tigers. Do you think Tim Sheens will be the coach?
I don't know. I wouldn't be shocked if he is a coach. I'll put it that way. It's not out of the realms of possibility. I don't think Brett Morley is probably done enough to keep that job. If it's me, it might be someone like a John Morris with Tim Sheens working closely with him. But it just depends on the desire of Tim Sheens. But I'd say he'd be favourite at the moment.
Andrew Webster to the Warriors. We've already spoken about that one. But the Bulldogs, has there been any news on who could be a front runner there?
No, they've been a bit quiet at the moment, the Bulldogs. I'm not exactly sure. I think they're still in the mix for Cameron Ciraldo. Whether that eventuates or not, I'm not sure. But, Christian Wolf, Cameron Ciraldo, they're probably the two names being mentioned at the moment.
Is Freddie an option?
I wouldn't think so. I'm not sure, though. It's hard to predict anything that Phil Gould's going to do. So I think if he is an option, obviously that will happen at the end of the Origin series, and maybe that's what Gus is waiting for.
And Justin Holbrook at the Titans, obviously under the pump. Can you see him being there next year?
All reports are that he won't be. I'm not too sure about what really goes on at the Titans. It's not a club that I track closely in terms of my day-to-day work, but from the outside looking in, they've been disappointing. But what's cost them is what they've allowed to occur with their player recruitment and retention, and some of those decisions have been brain dead, and it could cost Justin Holbrook his coaching career.
Well, what did they expect, Michael? I've spoken about this before. Like their spine, just on the basis of youth alone, it's in a photo finish for the worst spine in the comp.
It is, yeah. And I was quite critical. I didn't have them anywhere near my 8 to start the year because I just didn't think that they had the players in those key positions that were capable of, stringing games together. And the problem that they've got is like, Jaden Campbell's a really good player. AJ Brimson's a really good player. Toby Sexton looks like, he had glimpses last year of being a good player. They don't really have a first-class hooker there, but they were so worried about, these young guys and paying overs for some of them rather than going, okay, we've got Jamal Fogarty, who's a guy that is a steady hand. He's nothing brilliant, but he's a steady hand. He's the captain of the club. He's a guy that we can build around with those young guys, and they should have kept him and maybe made a tough call on one of the youngsters, but it was like they were too worried about what one of these youngsters could do elsewhere, which has impacted their side and sees them sit at the bottom of the ladder.
Let's finish off by chatting about State of Origin, and I mainly want to focus on selections here. Now, by every metric, Regan Campbell-Gillard is and always has been, especially in recent times, a better player than Jordan McLean. Now, I know Jordan McLean has been ruled out just in the past couple of hours of Origin 3, which is a sad story in itself. He gets his debut and then gets out through to injury. But then they bring in someone like Jacob Saifidi, who I would argue the exact same point for Regan Campbell-Gillard again. It's not like he's in an awful team like Josh Addo-Carr's excuse. Why have they gone with McLean and now Jacob Saifidi over Regan Campbell-Gillard? Yeah,
well, there's obviously an issue personality-wise. There has to be. I don't know why they'd opt against bringing Regan Campbell-Gillard in as that emergency player and a guy that's played Origin. I know he's only played twice, but he's played for Australia. He's played in plenty of big games, and to head into an Origin decider, particularly with someone like Jacob Saifidi, I'm surprised. I would have David Klemmer ahead of Jacob Saifidi at the moment. I think David Klemmer's had an outstanding season as well, but he probably suffers from something similar to what Regan Campbell-Gillard does and is part of that New South Wales hierarchy. For whatever reason, they don't really rate him.
You must be right, Michael, because I thought Regan Campbell-Gillard was in New South Wales top 3 or 4 players in game one. I thought he was outstanding. And now he's been sent to the land of wind and ghosts. Do you think his rep career is over? Because, it doesn't look great at the moment.
His rep career seems to be over as long as Brad Fittler's the coach. I think that's probably fair to say. I know Mal Meninga's has a high opinion of him. He's picked him in the Kangaroos before, so Mal's shown that he's not influenced by what happens, at state level at times in terms of players that he likes. And if that had done the job for him in the past, he'll still pick him. So, I wouldn't say his, rep career has closed completely, but, in terms of New South Wales, potentially so.
It's interesting that you say that, because would it shock you if in the Australian team was Regan Campbell-Gillard and Josh Addo-Carr? Probably not, would it? No,
and Jake, if there was a test match after Origin 1, I wouldn't be surprised if Jake Trbojevic was picked either.
Well, there you go. Jack Whiten, would you have found a spot for him, and if so, how would you have done it?
It's tough. I wouldn't have had him on the bench just because of the way the makeup of that New South Wales bench with Damien Cook there. I like the impact that Talakai and the versatility that he has. So if you don't feel like Jack Whiten can play on the right-hand side, which I probably think he could, there's probably not a spot for him. And Matt Burton's predominantly a left-sided player and doesn't shift too far from that, so he was comfortable there. But I would have seen if he could play on that right-hand side for Stephen Crichton.
Are you surprised Queensland went with Tom Gilbert over someone like David Fifita? Now, I know the Titans have been atrocious, and I get that he's only had one game back from injury, but in a decider, if you just needed him for 25 or 30 minutes at the back end, that'd be a pretty big bullet in the chamber for Queensland. Yeah,
I think it comes down to something, probably faith, I guess, and belief that David Fifita could do the job, and they probably just don't have that. We've seen him be so erratic at times throughout his career, and in a decider, ideally you'd say yes because of the impact and thrust that he could have off the interchange bench, but, we've seen him at his worst at times, and, maybe they just thought it was too much of a liability carrying an Origin decider.
Well, Mick, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. Hopefully it's not the last time.
All good, mate. Thank you.
A big thanks to Michael for coming on the show today, and you can catch all his work on the Daily Telegraph website. By the way, if you want to get in contact with me, you can on Twitter at @tcanfell, and don't forget to give the 60 Go Facebook page a like as well. My name is Tom Canfell. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. And until next time, this has been the 60 Go podcast, and that is full time.